So, Lucy, I guess we should introduce who we are and where we're coming from on the issue of mental health. Shall I introduce myself first? Yep. I spent my late 20s and all of my 30s suffering from severe anxiety and panic. Some of that time was through a bad relationship, and the rest of it was just stuck there, and it took some time to get that all unstuck. And towards the end of that time, I became a counsellor, a helpline counsellor for a group called First Steps to Freedom, which I don't know if it even exists now, but I was a volunteer for them for some time. And I can say that for anybody who is wondering if they can get rid of their anxiety and panic, that yes, you can, and completely. When I say completely, that doesn't mean that you will never have a moment where you're anxious, but it does mean that you are what most people would consider normal, although I don't really like that word. So that's where I'm coming from. But I actually have very little experience of the exercise aspect, which I know is incredibly important, and I know it from my own illness a few years ago, and how much better I felt when I lost weight and exercised. So I'm going to introduce you, Lucy, please.
Sure. So I'm Lucy. I am 41 next week. I had a good chunk of my lifetime was on antidepressants as an adult. So I had 12 years on antidepressants from pretty much graduating from university at 21 until I was about 32 or 33. And having antidepressants for that period of time was interesting because it masked generally feelings of anxiety because it just knocked the edges off everything. So actually coming off them in my early 30s was quite a jarring experience, because then suddenly I had feelings of anxiety that I hadn't necessarily noticed before, because they were all kind of just sort of smoothed over for quite a long period of time. And I came off them at the end of a relationship. My ex-husband had a stroke. We were getting divorced. I then got burgled. I then got mugged in the same year. So it was a really challenging year to have everything all happen at the same time. I also entered another very bad relationship, but I'm definitely the other side of that. But
it's to be hoped so, because you married my son.
Now. But the one thing that certainly throughout, probably from around the age of 24, that sort of kept me in a good place was to have access to being active and exercising, because it just offers so many different positive things to physical health and mental health. So for me, I think if I hadn't have had the access to exercise, I would have definitely had to go back onto antidepressants during that very challenging period as I came off them. Wow. But equally, it's enhanced my life in other ways that allow you to actually make better choices for your life, because I think medication will be very, very important and very necessary for a lot of people, but for me at certain points it prevented me from actually making the changes that then made my life a lot better. So
that's really interesting, Lucy, because that means that we are absolutely coming from two sides of the same coin, because I was offered antidepressants when I first had anxiety, twice in fact during that period. And if they'd had them in their hands, I might have bitten their hands off for them. But something made me say no, and I never took any drugs at all for my anxiety. And I don't know, I don't want to say that you shouldn't, but I think at some point, you need to deal with the issues that are causing the problem. And so I guess if you've got a severe panic, a severe anxiety, for a very good reason, and they always are good reasons, then going to the doctor and even taking antidepressives or whatever they suggest for you can be a very good time. But I think at some point you kind of have to address whatever it is.
Yeah, I think I'm always very careful because I think everyone's experience of anxiety is completely different, and I think it would be wrong of me to say I don't take antidepressants, because I think they're so important for a lot of people. And as one doctor said to me, if you were a diabetic and you had diabetic medication, that is the way your body is inclined. You're not going to be able to come off your diabetic medication.
No,
that is just who you
exactly.
are. But I think for me it was. What I discovered in myself is it was just not allowing me to make the changes that I wanted to do, because everything was just at a sort of just about acceptable level. So for me, it was about sort of challenging myself to see if there was a different way of managing some of those issues. And actually the big issue was the relationship. So there was a very, my sort of 12-year relationship, I started taking antidepressants 6 months into that relationship, and I stopped about 6 months out of the relationship. So there was obviously some correlation with that. Not a bad person, that particular individual, just for
No. Things happen in your life. In fact, we can look back and say that these people, even though the ones that appear bad, are more often sad than bad.
Yeah, exactly.
And letting go of all that is the stuff that you can't change is really, I think, fundamental. Anyway, I invited you here because I want to hear about the way that exercise. Because I kind of avoided the exercise route, even though I knew it was important, because I had agoraphobia type panic attacks. So I'd be really interested, particularly in how you can help, because a lot of our members on this group have had or are experiencing anxiety attacks. It's really common in creative people. I have no idea why, but maybe I don't know which causes the other. I don't know whether the anxiety causes the creativity or the creativity boosts the anxiety. But if you have agoraphobia, which a lot of creatives do, and that's why we stay at home and make things, how can you use that drug that exercise is? How can you start to use it?
I think first of all, the barrier to a lot of people about exercise can be this perception that you have to have a certain type of body, or you need to look a certain way, or have a certain background. And actually, I think that is that's the most unhelpful thing, because actually everyone has a body and everyone's body is different. So actually everyone's appetite and enjoyment of activity will be different. And I think it's all about finding what works for you. And I love running and I love walking. But if someone said go and do a dance class, I'd probably enjoy it. But I find it really challenging because I'm not very coordinated, whereas some people might really enjoy that. So I think the one thing I say to anyone that is interested in seeing what benefit have some movement can have is just try different things and do it in a very steady way. Because I think one of the other problems people have is that they might go to the doctor and the doctor says, right, you need to start exercising.
Yes.
And it feels like a prescription, or it feels like something that they should endure, whereas actually that's the worst thing you can do. Because if you only see the exercise as a medicinal or a treatment, you kind of lose the joy of it. And for me, every time I go out for a run and for a walk, I sort of think to myself, what if this is the last time I could run?
Ooh.
And I make sure.
I suppose that in fact, that negative, looking at the positives by way of the negatives has been really important to me. When I had my stoma, I was off. Obviously, I was in the state of having just been diagnosed cancer, and I hear a lot of people now saying, I really don't want to have my bladder taken out and have a stoma, etc. And I have found that the very best thing for them to do is almost what I did, because I was almost gifted with this, it's this or death situation. And if they look at it in that way, which you just said about it, what if this was the last?
Yeah.
What if you can't have this? How will you feel? And that's a really good way of looking at things, I think. And one thing I wanted to say about my experience of exercise is that I never fancy it before I do it.
Yeah.
And I always enjoy it when I do it. So how do you get over that? I even sometimes, I could do with a hint about this myself. How do you get over that I don't really feel like it moment in order to get to the moment where you go, oh, actually, I'm quite enjoying this?
Yeah, I mean, my general philosophy, which I put a caveat to this, my general philosophy is that the only runs that I regret are the ones that I don't do, because actually, even if it's raining, I'm not really feeling like it. I would say I cannot recall a moment and run where I've gone out and I've come back and I've gone, wish I hadn't done that. Now, I will caveat this because that can be quite a limiting belief for some people where they feel like they have to do it. They might force themselves out with a really bad injury. So I'm always very caveated and said, don't recognise your limitations and don't push yourself beyond where you should be. But for me, like sometimes I think I remember at some of my darker times when I knew that I needed to go out, but there was that kind of procrastination or just anxiety or whatever was stopping me. So it'd just be little things, because everything builds up to that first step outside. So it might be when you wake up, rather than staying in your pajamas, you put your run kit on, or it might be when you wake up.
Okay, so your run kit before your cup of coffee or whatever, puts you in the mindset that I'm going to be doing something later, but I can have my coffee, which I enjoy, and all that sort of thing.
Exactly. If you're at least dressed in your active wear, whatever that might be, or you put your shoes on, then you're kind of telling your body in a very subconscious way of you're going to be doing some activity later. So you even sort of in the back of your mind, you're thinking, I'm gonna be getting out there, or you sort of, you can do a bit of bargaining with yourself and say, right, you don't have to go out for a half an hour. Just go out, walk to the end of the road, and come back if you don't fancy it. And I think this is the other thing. People get really sort of wrapped up in, I must do this or I must do that, or if I don't do a half an hour run, then there's no point.
High expectations, big disappointments.
Absolutely. And I think, as I say, I think the most important thing is to try different things that you enjoy. The other thing you can do as well is that one of the best things for me around running has been the friendships and the community that I have been able to be a part of. So if I was particularly not enjoying the actual activity, as I say, I'm very much not someone to force yourself into doing something you don't enjoy. But if I make a commitment to a friend to meet them for a run or a walk, it's far more likely to happen than if I just am relying on myself, because that TV program or that nap or that book or that procrastination or that messing around on my phone will distract me from that. Whereas if I say, friend, I'm going to meet you at 9 o'clock and we'll do a run together, then it's a lot harder to let someone else down.
What about people who have social phobia? How can they? How can you reassure them that maybe going for a run is not going to make them more anxious about the? I'm not saying, I think you know what I mean.
Yeah. So
how should somebody with a social phobia approach the idea? Because even the idea of joining something.
Yeah, I remember those days. I think probably I remember back in 2005, and I was having some CBT with a particular therapist, and she was sort of saying to me like, "What are your main concerns?" I was just saying to her, I feel very lonely. I'm obviously in a relationship, but I just feel very lonely, like I don't have friends. And she said, "I don't think you're far off from having friends." And actually, shortly after that, I joined a few groups. Like I joined a Women's Institute group, and made lots of. In fact, that was how I found my way to running and ultimately to meeting Alan, because it was one group who I joined the WI, and then one of my WI friends joined a running group and introduced me to Park Run, and then I joined Park Run, and then I got into my running group that then in that community I met Alan. So it's all about the sort of the small steps that you can take to.
Yeah, well, I always thought that WI was a thing for older people, but it's interesting to find out that it's not. And in fact, I think what happened was during my age group, it was something that your mother's age group did. But you're another age group again, and it's lost that thing, and it's now got a sort of more spark.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not involved in that particular group any longer, but my friendships from there are very long-standing. In fact, one of my best friends came for a garden chat yesterday, who I met from WI. But we were Buns and Roses, so we were what they called a new wave WI group, and it was people of all ages actually, because some of our members were older and some of them were in their 20s, that just wanted to, and again this is tied in with anxiety, just wanted to do something different away from all of the technology and work, and do something creative. Because as I say, running is one thing that works for me in terms of managing my mental health, but it is only one tool. And I think the other thing as well is if you rely all of your sort of medication or treatment on one aspect. For example, if you get injured and you can't be active, that's almost more unhelpful than having it in the first place. I think you've got to be I'm always very cautious to say to people, don't just have one thing that helps you. Make sure you've spread it into several things because then you can feed each thing. So for me, it's things like, and they can be interconnected. So for example, volunteering is a very important thing for me, because taking yourself out of your own head to help someone else is really, really good for mental health. And so I volunteer by leading runs at Run Club. But I've also volunteered at running WI meetings, which I don't do so much anymore. But then I'm a guide leader, so having a viewpoint of another different group of people, like younger people, is really great. So volunteering, then there's the creative side.
Well, those are your creative outlets. But the members of this group are in creative business, and the problem is that creative people, because of the nature of their work, are very, very sedentary.
Yeah.
Now, let's discuss for a moment let's not frighten anybody, but the various physical aspects of sitting around all day. And I honestly do believe that part of my illness, my big illness, was caused, I don't believe that cancer comes from one place. I think it comes from a combination of negative effects on your body, whether they be mental or physical. And in my case, I believe that they were a combination of all those things. But one of those was being extremely sedentary.
Yeah.
And the benefit of getting up and just moving, even if it's only from your seat to the kitchen and back, is that you wake up your lymphatic system. And that is what clears the toxins out of your body. And it's your lymphatic system that shows when you have got or have had or are about to have some kind of serious illness. So I'd be interested to know more about the other effects of running on your physical health, because you can't separate the two, can you?
No, absolutely. And I think anxiety in modern times, so anxiety is obviously it's actually generally a helpful thing in the right circumstances. So there's a really great book called The Chimp Paradox. And
I've read it. In fact, Alan bought me it.
Yeah. So basically, the chimps that lived the longest were those that were anxious, that heard a sound in the bush and would run away rather than go, what is that sound? Oh, it's a tiger or whatever eats chimps.
Yeah.
So actually, anxiety as humans is set to preserve our lives and to protect us. However, in modern times, again, another great author, Matt Haig, he wrote a book that basically we are now anxious from invisible sharks that we can't see. So a lot of people, particularly in the last year, 12, 18 months, we're very anxious about something we can't see and we can't really picture in our minds what we're reacting to. So, and you can have very physical reactions to very invisible situations. So things like everyone's phone is just within reach. Obviously, I'm doing this, but mine's here. And at any moment, I've got the news setting, because I'm addicted to the news, where it will pop up with a news alert and you're immediately in fight and flight response, like, what's happened? What do I need to do? How do I react? And your body is kind of constantly in that heightened state with adrenaline to things that you are that aren't actually, they are real, but they're not sort of tangible.
I just don't do that. I don't have WhatsApp, and I don't listen to the bings and bongs, and I don't react to them. And you know, if you have a problem with this, I think maybe turning that off for certain periods of the day.
Exactly, yeah. But what I was going to say is, because we've got that very sort of invisible but very physical reaction. So physical reactions of anxiety can be sweating, they can be raised heart rates, and that kind of those sort of, then you get the thoughts racing and everything kind of cascades. But actually, if you go and do physical exercise, it makes sense to your body. If you run and your heart rate goes up, if you run and you're out of breath, that is a sensible reaction. So it's almost kind of realigning those sorts of experiences with it, so that
your body's using that adrenaline that's been caused. And if the adrenaline is sitting on top of you while you're not moving, then it has a sort of build-up effect, doesn't it? So the adrenaline is really useful to us if there is a tiger. But if there isn't a tiger, we have to find another way of expending it, don't we?
Yeah, absolutely. And just, as I say, just making sense of the world that you're in. And so in another way as well, from a running or an activity perspective, you have to be. So I will obviously, if I go for a run by myself, I am worried that I might fall over or what have you, or encounter someone else that needs help. So I will take my phone with me, because that's the safe thing to do, and I would not recommend people don't do that. But it means that if you're running, you're not looking at your phone, you're not kind of constantly on high alert, and actually your attention is looking at everything around you. So actually you're far more in the moment than worrying about what's happened or what hasn't happened. So it's just, and I don't think there's many other situations in modern world that allows that more present moment sort of activity. Because I spend my day at the moment sat in this room from about 8 in the morning till about 6:30 at night working. And so it's very hard to kind of really ground myself in the moment, because I'm just constantly responding to, in my current role, there are 9 different ways I can receive a message from someone, which is 9 different forms of communication, which is very overwhelming. So actually just being able to leave that all behind and go out, it allows your brain to kind of be much more in a different sort of room, essentially.
Meditative, yeah. I mean, like washing up actually is meditative as well. Funnily enough, I lost my dishwasher. It broke down, and I didn't know whether to buy a new one, but it became too expensive. And also I wanted to buy one of those little robot vacuums instead. So I've learned to wash up again, and I've learned that washing up is a very meditative practice. And we often say we don't have time to meditate, but if you go for a run, you're doing the 2 things at once.
Exactly.
And if you're washing up, you've got time to meditate. So I think we probably need to take all these moments that we're allowed to allow the mind to empty and appreciate them just for what they are.
I think there's a lot to be said about learning what works for you and what works for your body, because I think sometimes a lot of the structures in place are quite rigid and quite sort of imposed and assume everyone is the same. So, for example, sleep is quite an interesting one. There's a really good book called Why We Sleep, and that goes.
I've read that one as well. It's another.
It's a really good, but that goes back to, like, as more sort of animalistic humans, we would have naturally slept together in tribes and had humans that stayed up late to do the lookout and protect the tribe, and those that got up early. And actually, if you're more of a late inclined person, but you're doing an 8 a.m. start every day like I am, you're missing out on core bits of your sleep, because you probably don't go to sleep any sooner, but you have to wake up earlier. And so sometimes a lot of it's
that from the point of view of the creative business owners here, some of us will, not me, will naturally want to start at 9 and finish at 5 and that kind of thing. And I've never been that way. But if you can't have what you want, you've got to want what you can have. And I think what we've got, what us people who are self-employed, even if we're not earning enough,
Yeah.
We do have that opportunity to wake up when we want and
Yeah.
go to bed exactly when we want. So from the point of view of the users of this group, we should take full advantage of that, of the ability to do that, and schedule the things that we have to do at those points when we are feeling more able to do it. Now, I want to finish with what we talked about earlier when we were just flicking through to see if we knew what we were doing. It's reminded me about vulnerability. You were talking about shame and vulnerability, etc.
Yeah.
And how sometimes people mask their psychological vulnerability with physical vulnerability. In that, I mean, I don't want to say that I don't want to put it in terms of some people aren't really physically ill who say they are. I want to put it in terms of some people are masking their mental health problems with I'm ill and therefore I don't have to deal with this problem. And I think that allowing yourself to be more vulnerable is actually quite helpful. But I'd love to know your opinion on this, because you've got a more modern, up-to-date opinion on it.
Yeah, so I think the context we were sort of talking about that is, so I work in recruitment, which is quite it's a sales-based role.
Quite stressful, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a stressful role because it's a sales role and you're dealing with two sides are both people. So you're selling jobs to a candidate and candidates to a client, and both sides there are people that have emotions and choices and will potentially do things that you don't expect. So it can be, there's a lot of different factors going on. When I first joined, it was incredibly macho as an industry, and it was very much you couldn't show any weakness. In my very early 20s, I had quite bad OCD, and I had to have. I
didn't know that.
Yeah, so I had to have so I joined some group sessions for my OCD, which in and of itself made me realise that my experience was far lesser than some of the impacts that other people were having. So that was helpful in and of itself. And actually, as I've got older and as I've sort of learned the different techniques, it's not been as much of an impact. But I had to say to my boss at the time, I need to have an hour each week where I go to this group. And it felt like a really difficult conversation to have. But actually, the reality was I was working from 8:30 till 9:30 p.m. every night for the company. Wasn't being paid a great deal. They were not looking after my physical or mental health. But they made me feel like they'd been really kind, letting me have 1 hour a week for this therapy. And I don't work there anymore, but they have tried to even quite recently get me to join them back, and I was like, that was quite a toxic environment. I'm not sure that's something I want to go back to. But the shame that they kind of made me feel about that was really made me quite angry at the time. But as I reflect on it now, I'm thinking that was awful, because I was contributing far more than other people. I was only 24. And actually, I feel like they had a better responsibility to make sure that I was being looked after. Where I am now is a lot.
Also, they lost. Not looking after your employees loses you your best employees. If we take mental ill health to be something that we consider to be permanent and a complete no-no for your job, we're actually losing some of our greatest assets.
But I think what was quite interesting is that on the surface, no one else other than my manager would have known that I was struggling. Exactly. I did have some time off because I had a car accident because I couldn't sleep, and I wasn't awake when I had my accident. So the doctor actually signed me up and said, you need some time off to recover. So I had some time off to recover, but actually to everyone else, they just thought I'd had this car accident. And that it was in 2004, so this is about 16, 17 years ago. So we have definitely come further forward now.
We have.
In my company now, we did a lot of work around mental health. And I'd always been quite open, because what I learned from that experience was, if I was made to feel shameful for just wanting to try and get better and feel better and address some of these things, it makes it really hard for people to seek help. And actually, of all sort of illnesses, you cannot improve your mental health unless you're willing to have a conversation.
Well, that's right. And that's what happened to me. And we're going back now. I can't even think how many years. But when I was working one of my very few jobs, because I've hardly worked for anybody all my life apart from myself. But my job when Kira was born, so I can say now it was 32 years ago, was in the social services. And that's very mentally stressful job anyway. Yeah. And I had postnatal depression, of course, didn't recognise it. And it wasn't really very thought of at the time. But it doesn't matter whether you get it because you've just had a child or whatever.
Yeah.
People going through a period of depression in those days would cover it.
Because you've had a baby, you should be blooming, you should be very happy. The expectation was that nothing would ever be wrong.
That's right. And I think that my turnaround came when I had a very good doctor at the time, actually. And it came when he put me down for some time off and put the words anxiety neurosis. And I said, do you think you could change that word neurosis, because it's got negative implications?
Yeah.
Neurotic was the word that people, even though it's actually the correct word for the condition, it has very negative connotations. Yeah. And my turnaround was actually being able to say to the doctor, please take that word out.
Yeah.
I don't want that word on my piece of paper. And that was me putting myself back in the driving seat. And from then on, I pretty much drove my own recovery. But that doctor was very good anyway. And he did take that out. And he did a very, very strange thing, which some people might find a little bit strange. As I left his room, he put his hand on my shoulder. And that said, I see you. And that was a pivotal moment as well in my recovery. It was like, I'd left his room having said no to, in my case, to drugs. And he was giving me the benefit of that one recognition that I was in a struggle. And I think that's very important. And that's why you say you should talk about it. That's why we should be able to talk about it, because we should be able to get that recognition of our struggle from other people. And that's all you have to do to help somebody who's struggling as well, is recognize them.
Yeah, definitely. Because I think one of the most at my company now, I am a mental health champion. So the first thing I did was to share my story, and I said, this is what I've experienced. And what really, and I know people were very well intentioned. I got lots of comments on our internal sort of social media channel saying, you're so brave for sharing this. And my pushback was like, this is not bravery. Bravery is having the courage to deal with actually what you're going through. Talking about it shouldn't be brave. If I talked about breaking my leg, I don't think people would describe me as brave. And actually, we reinforce that you have to be brave to talk about your mental health. We don't move forward. So I had quite a long conversation about that. And then what I found, as people have reached out to me and said, can I talk to you? And I'm like, yeah, that's fine. Can we get a coffee? Can we go off site? And often they say, so I'm really struggling to sleep, and every time I get to sleep, I wake up and my brain is racing, and I'm like, just by saying to them, that's normal. You're not the only person that experiences this. Makes people feel better.
And you can't get that message if you don't talk. You can't get other people can't say to you, I get that, if you don't ever tell them that you get it first. So you might say that it's brave, and if you want to feel that it's brave, that's fine.
Yeah, absolutely. But I found it problematic that everyone felt that they had to tell me that, and I was like, I was like, I'd
It
rather
shouldn't be that way, but in a
Yeah.
way, they were just trying to say,
Yeah.
I'm with you.
Yeah, and other people have had debates about this with the mental health champions, and one of our trainers that was training us from I think it was Time to Change. She was doing some training, and I respect everyone's views, but I think if we could, and Matt Haig is very much like, if we can move away from it having to be a brave thing to talk about, I think we've made some more progress.
Yeah.
I think if it's
But
just
it does take the first brave few to do it. But
Yeah.
now we're at that stage where it shouldn't have to be brave. I completely agree with you. Well, Lucy, tell us about your park run. Is there a nice park run near where you live, or have you moved out of that area?
So park run, for anyone that doesn't know, is a weekly 5-kilometre run. So the name was run is a bit of a misnomer, because when they started up, it was about the run, whereas now it can be walking. It can be, people have done it on, some people do it in their wheelchairs, some people do it on crutches. So it's very, very inclusive, and it does not matter how fast or not you do it. Sadly, parkrun's obviously been closed for a while, although fingers crossed it is coming back in June. But our nearest now is in Pontefract, which is 9 miles away. But as you know, I met Alan at Woodhouse Moor, and that is, I think, the interesting thing about it, and why it's like some people have said, well, does parkrun need to come back? Everyone can just go for a run. It's more the routine and the community that you have, because you can immediately feel part of the community by just turning up and seeing lots of people that are like you and are there for a variety of different reasons, but also the same reason. And also the inclusivity you get, because you don't have to run every week, you can also volunteer. So for example, when I broke my shoulder, I would go and volunteer, and I wouldn't feel removed from with a run club, it's harder to feel like, my run club's great, but it's harder to feel apart if you're not actually running with them. Whereas parkrun, you can go and volunteer and just see the people. And then the most important thing is everyone does the activity, which is great, and you get outside and see nature, but you go for a coffee afterwards and you can have those chats with people. But
these things online, Lucy, if you're interested, if somebody's interested in joining a parkrun, and I know they have been closed and they are opening, but if somebody's interested in joining, is parkrun something that they can look up online? Can they look up their local?
So parkrun is completely free. I don't think it's in Spain yet, unfortunately, which is a bit.
No, I'm not worried. No, there aren't very many people in this group that are in Spain. We don't need it anyway, because all the old ladies, well, we all of us walk up and down the road about 5 o'clock at night, or a bit later when it's hotter. We all walk up and down the road. That's quite common for us.
If you just go onto the parkrun.co.uk or parkrun.com website, it will tell you exactly what you're doing. Their social media content's really good. There's podcasts about everything that they do. But I suppose the other thing that is worth saying about parkrun and just generally conversations in general, and one of the things I found really difficult, because I've tried to keep my run and talk sessions going on like a Zoom, but it's so much like the conversations you have like this are very, very different to the conversation you have with someone next to you, because you have a much more relaxed conversation walking or running or jogging with someone next to you, because face to face is always quite intense. And I have to say, coming out of lockdown, I'm finding I'm quite socially awkward because I haven't been interacting with people, and eye contact is going to be really difficult. And I've met a few friends that I've known for 10 plus years, and my eye contact with them is hard. But the conversations you have alongside someone running and walking, you can talk about the much more difficult issues without having to be face to face. So actually, it's going for, if you are worried about a friend, or you're worried yourself and you want some advice, going for a walk, you will have a much less intense conversation, but a very productive conversation, I would think.
Yeah. And if you've got any sort of phobia joining a park run, the first few you can wear a mask for, can't you?
Yeah, I mean, this is
a bit distance.
This is what we were talking about. We were sort of saying if we go back, but the other good thing about it is it's not a race. So you obviously get a time each week, and you can improve or not. It's entirely up to you. But we were saying we could go, and if we didn't feel comfortable, we could either go home, because again, you've not paid anything, it doesn't matter, or you can just hold back and walk. And I've done it with one of my friends has heart failure, so I've walked, and she feels really, and she's a bigger lady, and she feels sometimes a little bit sort of nervous about people waiting for her. But she's run half marathons before. She is the perfect example that you don't have to look or have a particular body to do what you want to do with it. And I always try and view my body more based on what it can do than what it looks like, because I think if you view it based on aesthetics, you're always going to be sort of measuring yourself up to.
Well, I'm past all that aesthetic stuff now. So, and I look back at it from the point of view of sort of a sort of happy old lady that sort of, I understand it. I've been there, but really, it doesn't matter. And when you know, in a few years' time, it won't matter to you either. So you might as well stop it mattering now. That kind of attitude.
I think, and the one thing I always, because I'm also a guide leader, and one thing I always try and do is show them that actually just get out and be active, because I think how you look or the sweat or those sorts of things can be quite, so if you're a young girl, it can feel quite awkward. So I happily like wave at them when I'm running around.
You enjoy the shower more when you've sweated a lot anyway. Yeah, so always try and look at the positives. Yeah,
absolutely.
Lucy, thank you very much for being with me. You are an absolute tonic, and may you long continue to be so. Lots of love, Lucy. Thanks very much.
Take care. Bye-bye.